The royal banquet hall shimmered under the refracted light of Virelia's twin moons, its walls lined with shimmering banners of violet and gold. Nobles and warriors from a dozen alien houses gathered around a long crystalline table, their hushed conversations masking the tension in the air. I stood near the edge of the room, my human uniform painfully plain among the ornate robes, watching the alien queen, Serenia, as she raised her glass to toast peace. My orders had been clear: keep her alive at all costs, but nothing in the AS mission briefing prepared me for the way her emerald eyes locked onto mine across the crowd. Then, from the corner of my vision, a flicker, too fast, too deliberate, moved among the servants. My instincts screamed. A flash of steel caught the moonlight, and I was already moving. I crashed into her just as a thin blade hissed through the air, embedding itself into the polished floor where her heart had been moments ago. The hall erupted into chaos, guests scattering as security barriers flickered to life. Serenia's hand gripped my arm with surprising strength, her other hand already pulling a concealed plasma pistol from her sash. "Find them!" she commanded, her voice steady despite the uproar. I scanned the room, my eyes tracking a cloaked figure sprinting toward the rear exit. Without hesitation, I took off, weaving through panicked nobles and overturned chairs. The assassin glanced back, their face hidden behind a metallic mask, and vanished into the shadows of the servant corridors. The chase had begun, and I wasn't about to let them disappear. The corridors behind the hall were narrow and dimly lit, lined with crates of ceremonial wine and stacks of ornate armor pieces awaiting tomorrow's parade. I caught the glint of the assassin's blade again, just ahead, and my pulse surged. Pushing harder, I lunged around a corner only to find the corridor empty. My breath slowed as I raised my sidearm, the faint hum of the palace's energy core filling the silence. A sudden clang from above drew my eyes upward, just in time to see the masked figure dropping from a maintenance hatch. They landed lightly, spun, and flung another blade toward me. I twisted aside, feeling the heat of the energy-forged edge pass by my cheek. We locked eyes for a split second before they bolted once more, and I chased them deeper into the labyrinth. I rounded another corner and came face to face with two of the Queen's personal guards, their armored forms blocking the path. "Assassin!" I barked, pointing ahead. They didn't waste a second, splitting up to cut off the intruders' escape routes. My ears picked up a faint exchange of plasma fire ahead, the smell of scorched metal drifting back toward me. By the time I reached the next junction, one guard was down, his armor smoking from a point-blank shot. The assassin was still moving, wounded now, but dangerous. I fired a stun burst that clipped their leg, sending them stumbling. They spun toward me with sudden ferocity, hurling a smoke sphere to cover their retreat. I coughed, vision blurring, but pushed forward blindly, my mind focused on one thought. The Queen's life still hung in the balance. When I finally emerged from the haze, the masked figure was gone, replaced by the distant wail of palace alarms. Guards swarmed the area, their visors scanning for residual heat signatures. Serenia appeared through a side passage, flanked by two uninjured guards, her expression unreadable. "You acted quickly," she said, her voice lower now, almost a whisper meant only for me. But this was no lone assassin. She stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. This was a warning. The weight of her words settled into my chest as we stood in the flickering light of the palace corridors. Somewhere in the city beyond, the one who sent that killer was already planning their next move. And I had a sinking feeling it wouldn't be the last time I'd throw myself between the Queen and death. The city of Virelia glowed like a living jewel beneath the palace terraces, its towering spires shimmering in the evening light. Yet, despite the beauty, tension coiled in the air like an unseen predator. I stood beside Serenia on the balcony, scanning the streets far below where citizens celebrated the coronation festival. Her royal gown had been traded for light battle armor, polished yet functional. Our enemies won't strike in the open, she said quietly, her gaze never leaving the horizon. They'll come where we're weakest. I kept my voice low. Then we find the weak points before they do. She glanced at me, a faint, almost challenging smile curving her lips. It was the first time since the banquet that I sensed she might trust me. That fragile moment was shattered by the sound of distant detonations. Plumes of smoke rose from the lower market district, the cheers of the festival turning into screams. Without a word, Serenia spun toward the corridor, and I followed, boots pounding against marble floors. The palace security network flared to life streams of tactical data flooding my comm link. Localized blasts, one of the guards reported through the channel. But no casualties yet. Distraction tactics. That made my blood run cold. Distractions meant the real attack was somewhere else. Serenia's eyes narrowed as she read the same data feed. The archives, she breathed. They're after the lineage codex. I didn't know what that was yet, but her urgency made it clear. It couldn't fall into enemy hands. The archives were buried deep within the palace, behind vault doors older than most of the city itself. We raced down narrow staircases lit by bioluminescent crystals, our footsteps echoing off ancient stone. When we reached the vault corridor, the guards stationed there were already down. Unconscious, not dead, which suggested precision over carnage. The air smelled faintly of ion discharge, proof the intruders were still close. Serenia moved with a quiet, lethal grace beside me, her sidearm drawn, every step measured. We turned a corner and spotted 3 cloaked figures at the vault's entrance, one of them kneeling by the lock, hacking it with a glowing datapad. I didn't hesitate. My plasma burst took the nearest one in the shoulder, dropping them instantly. The others spun toward us, their masks reflecting the vault's light like faceless predators. Serenia was faster than I'd ever seen, her pistol dropping one before they could fire, while I charged the last. We slammed into the wall, my grip locking on their weapon arm. The masked figure fought like a trained killer, but desperation gave me the edge. A sharp knee to their midsection sent them sprawling, and Serenia was on them in a heartbeat, pressing her blade to their throat. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The assassin didn't answer. Instead, they twisted just enough to crush a capsule hidden in their hand, instantly dissolving into dust as some kind of disintegration tech tore through their body. The vault doors remained intact, but the message was clear. Someone had the resources to burn pawns without hesitation. By the time the alarms ceased, the city was under heavy lockdown. Serenia convened a private war council in her command chamber, a vast, circular room lit by holographic tactical maps. I stood slightly behind her throne-like command seat, close enough to hear every whispered word. Generals and advisors debated. Strategies, some arguing for a full-scale purge of suspected sympathizers, others urging restraint to avoid panic. Serenia silenced them with a single raised hand. "We defend, but we do not destroy what we protect," she said firmly. "Our strength will be in precision, not brutality." She glanced back at me then, almost as if to gauge my reaction. I gave the smallest nod, knowing she'd just earned more than my loyalty, she'd earned my respect. The council adjourned with orders set, but Serenia didn't dismiss me. Instead, she led me through a hidden side passage lined with ancient murals of Varelian queens long past. "Every one of them faced betrayal," she said quietly, her fingers brushing a painted crown. "Some fell, some fought back. I will not be remembered as the last to fail." There was a rawness in her voice now, something unarmored beneath the regal composure. I wanted to promise I'd see her through this, but the words stuck in my throat. She stopped at a locked chamber and keyed it open, revealing a war room even more secret than the council hall. "From now on," she said, "you'll see everything, the truth, no matter how dangerous." We spent hours poring over intercepted transmissions, enemy troop movements, and coded correspondence. The picture that formed was grim, a coalition of rival houses, mercenary fleets, and shadow operatives, all tied to a figure known only as the Regent. Serenya's voice hardened when she spoke the name, like she was tasting poison. "He was once my father's most trusted advisor," she told me, "until he decided the throne was his by right. The Regent had resources that rivaled entire planets, and the assassination attempt had been only his opening move." "If we can't stop him here," Serenya said, her gaze meeting mine, "he will take Virelia, and then he will take the galaxy." Our first counterstrike began at dawn. Serenya led from the front, her royal armor gleaming in the morning light as she rode an armored grav chariot into the plains outside the city. I stayed at her side, rifle in hand, as our combined forces clashed with a mercenary vanguard attempting to cut off supply routes. The battle was fierce, dust and plasma fire filling the air. Serenya fought like a warrior born, every movement efficient and deadly. I covered her flank, dropping targets before they could reach her. And in those moments, the formality between us was gone. We were simply two fighters in the same fight. But even as we pushed them back, I knew this was just the first wave. By the time the plains were ours, the sun was high and the field littered with the wreckage of burned-out skiffs and scorched armor. Serenya walked among the fallen, her expression unreadable, pausing only to ensure the wounded were tended to. "Victory, without honor," she murmured, "is no victory at all." I realized then that her strength wasn't just in her command, it was in her refusal to lose her humanity, even in the bloodiest of wars. It was dangerous, I thought, how much I admired that. Dangerous, too, how much I wanted to keep her alive, not just because it was my duty, but because I couldn't imagine this fight without her. The night after the plains battle was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting to break. I stood on the palace's outer walls, looking down over the torchlit streets where soldiers patrolled in careful rotations. Behind me, I could hear Serenya's footsteps approaching, light but deliberate. She came to stand beside me, her cloak rippling in the wind. "You're not sleeping," she said, not a question, just an observation. I gave a small shrug. "Neither are you." She didn't deny it. For a long moment, we just stood there, the stars sprawling endlessly above. "Us. The Regent will move soon," she said finally. "He will want the people to see me fall in the open." I glanced at her, and in the flickering light, I saw not just a queen, but someone who refused to bow, even if it killed her. At dawn, scouts brought word of movement on the southern front, a fleet massing in the skies over the Daskir Range, dangerously close to the crystal mines that powered half of Virelia's defense grid. Serenya called an immediate council, but this time she didn't summon the full court. Only her most trusted commanders, and me. "We can't meet them head-on," she said, her finger tracing a path across the tactical map. "But if we cut them off here," she tapped a narrow canyon marked in red, "we can force them into a choke point and shatter them." The generals argued about the risk. The canyon was treacherous, its walls unstable. Serenya met their doubts with steel in her voice. "It's a risk we take, or we watch the mines burn." And just like that, the plan was set. We moved before sunset, our forces splitting into two spearhead formations to flank the canyon. I stayed close to Serenya's command chariot, my rifle loaded and nerves wound tight. The canyon loomed ahead, its jagged walls casting long shadows that seemed to reach for us. We set the ambush lines with precision, Det charges on the upper ridges, marksmen concealed in natural overhangs. As the enemy vanguard entered the canyon floor, the air seemed to hum with tension. Serenya raised her hand, her eyes locked on the approaching skiffs. "Wait for my mark," she murmured, and I realized she wasn't just talking to the soldiers, she was talking to herself. When her hand dropped, The canyon erupted in light and sound, a perfectly timed storm of fire. The ambush was devastating, but the Regent's forces were relentless. Even as the first wave crumbled, heavier armor rolled in, their shields flaring against plasma fire. Serenia barked orders, her voice carrying over the chaos, adjusting our formation on the fly. I stayed near her, picking targets that threatened. Her position, but in the back of my mind, I kept wondering, where was the Regent himself? Then I saw him. A black skiff at the canyon's far mouth, its prow bearing the crimson crest of his rebellion. He didn't fight. He just watched, his visor catching the glare of the battlefield. And then, just as suddenly, he turned and left, as if this had been nothing more than a test. It left me cold. We held the canyon until nightfall, but victory came at a price. By the time we returned to the palace, Serenia's armor was scorched, and her voice was hoarse from command. She insisted on checking every wounded soldier herself before she allowed the medics to tend her own injuries. When she finally let me lead her to her chambers, she collapsed into a chair by the fire, rubbing her temples. "He's measuring us," she said quietly. "Testing where we bend, where we break." I crouched beside her. "Then we don't break." Her eyes met mine then, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the war outside didn't exist. Only this strange, dangerous alliance between us, built in fire and trust neither of us had expected to give. The next morning, Serenia summoned me to the vault chamber, the same one we'd defended days ago. This time, the great doors stood open, revealing not just the lineage codex, but a wall of ancient weapons, each one humming faintly with stored power. "These were gifts from the First Alliance," she explained, stepping inside. "Meant for a war we hoped would never come." She handed me a weapon unlike any I'd carried before. Lightweight, elegant, but with a destructive potential that made my skin crawl. "You'll need this," she said simply, as if she'd already decided. Where I would stand when the next strike came. I knew then she trusted me with more than her safety. She trusted me with her crown's survival. That survival was tested sooner than expected. A coded message intercepted by our spies confirmed the Regent's next move. A direct assault on the palace during the midwinter conclave, when dignitaries from allied systems would be present. Serenia's face hardened as she read the decrypted text. "He means to kill me in front of them," she said, "to show them I cannot protect, even myself." Her generals urged her to cancel the conclave, but she refused. "If I hide, he wins before he strikes." Instead, she ordered the palace defenses doubled, secret escape routes prepared, not for herself, but for the guests. "If they live, they will remember who shielded them," she told me later. That was when I realized her war wasn't just for her people, it was for the galaxy's perception of Virelia. The conclave began under skies heavy with snow, the palace glittering like a fortress of crystal and steel. Serenia wore her ceremonial armor, each plate etched with the history of her dynasty, her crown a delicate lattice of silver that somehow didn't dull the danger in her eyes. I moved unseen among the dignitaries, scanning for threats, my new weapon concealed beneath a heavy cloak. The first attack came not from the gates, but from above, assassins dropping from cloaked skiffs hovering just beyond the palace shield. Chaos erupted as guards engaged, blaster fire tearing through the snow-chilled air. Serenia didn't flee. She drew her sword and waded into the fray, her strikes as precise as they were deadly. I fought my way toward her, the weapon she'd given me cutting through enemy shields like paper. More assassins poured in from side passages, their blades aimed squarely at the queen. I reached her side just as one lunged, my shot catching them mid-stride. She glanced at me briefly, her breath clouding in the cold, and in that glance there was something unspoken. A wordless acknowledgement that without each other, this night would have already been lost. But the fight wasn't over. At the far end of the hall, the regent himself stepped into view, his crimson crest stark against the white marble. He smiled, a cold, knowing smile, and raised his hand. By the time the dust settled, half the hall was in ruins. The regent had escaped again, but his forces were broken. Their momentum stalled. Serenia stood at the center of the shattered throne room, blood on her cheek and fire in her eyes. The surviving dignitaries gathered around her, murmuring in awe at the queen who had fought alongside her own guards. She didn't make a speech. She simply raised her sword, its edge catching the light, and the room fell silent. It wasn't ceremony. It was a promise. She was not done, and neither was Virelia. Later, when the guests were escorted to safety, she found me leaning against a column, catching my breath. "You stayed," she said softly, as if surprised. "Always," I replied without thinking. And for the first time, she didn't hide the small, fierce smile that came in answer. Palace was eerily quiet in the days after the conclave battle. Repairs had begun, shattered marble replaced, scorched banners taken down. But the scars of the fight were everywhere. The air still carried the faint smell of ozone and fire, a reminder of how close the regent had come to winning. I found Serenia in the war room, standing alone before a star map lit with shifting points of light. Her armor was gone. She wore a simple tunic, but even without the crown, she still looked every bit a queen. "They'll try again," I said. She didn't look up. "I know." She turned toward me then, and for the first time since we'd met, there was no steel in her eyes, only exhaustion. "You should leave before they do. If the regent knows you were the one who stopped him, he'll hunt you to the ends of the stars." I stepped closer, shaking my head. "You don't get rid of me that easily. Besides," I let my gaze linger on hers, "I'm not done fighting for you." Something flickered in her expression, a crack in the walls she'd built, and then it was gone, replaced by a steady calm that almost hurt to look at. We spent the next hours planning, not just for defense, but for the counterstrike. Serenia's hand hovered over the star map, tracing a path through hostile territory toward the regent's stronghold. "He thinks he's untouchable there," she murmured. "We'll prove him wrong." Her strategy was ruthless, but elegant. Coordinated strikes on his supply lines, false intelligence to draw him into open ground, and one decisive assault to end the rebellion. I realized then that the woman beside me was more than a warrior. She was a master tactician, every move layered with meaning. And I realized something else. I wanted to see this through, not just for her cause, but for her. The night before our forces were to move, I found her in the palace gardens. Snow was falling, gathering in her hair, and for once the weight of her crown was gone. "When this is over," I said, "what happens to us?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer until the space between us was only the length of a breath. "If we survive," she said softly, "then maybe we find out." Her words held more than promise. They held the dangerous hope neither of us could afford in war. Still, I found myself smiling. "Guess I'd better make sure we survive then." When the fleets launched at dawn, I stood at her side on the command deck, watching Virelia's banners rise over the horizon. The regent would see us coming. He would be ready. But so would we. Serenia's voice rang over the comms, steady and unyielding. "For Virelia, for our people, for the stars." I tightened my grip on my weapon, feeling the hum of the engines beneath my boots. This was no longer just her war, it was ours. And no matter how far we had to go, I knew one thing for certain. I would follow her into fire, into darkness, into the heart of any enemy stronghold. And I would not stop until her throne was safe, and her enemies were ashes. The regent's forces broke faster than I expected. Serenya's trap worked flawlessly. Supply lines severed, escape routes cut, and his fleet caught between our armada and the asteroid field. His flagship tried to run, but we were already there. I led the boarding team, cutting through corridor after corridor of resistance until we reached his command deck. The regent stood in the middle of it, smirking like a man who thought death couldn't touch him. He was wrong. We didn't exchange speeches. No final monologue, no drawn-out duel. Just steel meeting steel, the thrum of energy weapons in the air, and the echo of each strike reverberating through my bones. In the end, it wasn't rage that drove my blade through his guard. It was resolve. When he fell, the war fell with him. His loyalists surrendered within hours, and the rebellion that had threatened to burn the galaxy to ash was over. But victory didn't feel like celebration. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down into what came next. The return to Varelia was unlike anything I'd seen. Crowds lined the landing platforms, banners snapping in the wind, the air thick with cheers and relief. Serenia walked beside me, her head high, every inch the queen her people needed. Yet when we reached the palace gates, she didn't go inside. Instead, she stopped, turned to me, and said, "Walk with me." We slipped away from the pageantry and into the quiet of the gardens, the same place where snow had once fallen between us. Only now, there was no snow, just the warm light of a new dawn. "I should knight you," she said after a long moment, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Or give you a title. But somehow, none of that feels like enough." I grinned. "Then don't. Just let me stay." She met my gaze, and there was no crown between us now. Just two people who had survived the fire together. "Stay," she whispered. And it wasn't an order this time. It was an answer. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and for once neither of us spoke. The silence said enough. The following weeks were filled with rebuilding, both the palace and the fragile peace that followed, but I could feel it. The galaxy was holding its breath. Somewhere out there, another storm was gathering. Serenia and I stood on the balcony one night, the stars stretching endless above us. "Do you think it's over?" I asked. She rested her hand on mine, her eyes on the horizon. "No," she said quietly. "But whatever comes next, we face it together." And for the first time since the war began, I believed her.